Okay. Well, I have a lot of power at theta.
A little bit you do, yeah. With eyes closed, which isn't actually a big deal always. And then
Uh-huh.
here's eyes open, where it's not very much at all. It's okay. So don't be thrown by the unusual things until we give you some context, right? But yeah, I mean, it's a lot with your eyes closed. Um, there's two types of data here, Alex, we gathered for you. One is the attention test, the ones and twos.
Okay, so how many pages of PDF do we have?
Well, we have the attention test right here, which is 2 pages.
Okay.
And then we have the brain maps, which have about 11 pages.
Okay.
But we're going to go through about 7 of those.
Okay.
We're going to start with the attention test because it's more straightforward and more valid. The labels make sense a bit more. So you remember the ones and twos?
One to choose.
The ones and twos test that you did? One, you know?
Oh, yeah. There was a lot of interference.
Interference? What do you mean?
Oh, like, wasn't there interference in the test? Like, you had to suppress responses?
Yeah.
Is that kind of like a Stroop's test?
Exactly right. You're right. Cognitive inhibition. Yeah, inhibition.
Mm-hmm.
No interference because the Stroop interference, which is the right term for the Stroop, is 2 things conflicting. So the color name and the color ink are in conflict at the same point in time.
Mm-hmm.
This is closer to a go, no go. Turn on your attention, stop your performance. Turn it on, stop it. Turn it on, stop it. It's hard to do that because it's so boring. We have 2 types of scores here. Attention is successfully clicking on the one. It's activating, it's the go. And response control is the inhibition, the no-go. For people that are 31, the comparison database is set up on a bell curve where the average score is 100 with a 15-point standard deviation. So you're typical broadly for the impulsivity or being automatic, and you're a little soft, but not a big deal. For attention,
attention is what?
Attention is clicking successfully on the one.
Oh, so a quotient 88.
And that's 12 points below average, which is not quite 1 standard deviation.
Okay.
So it's a little soft. 85 or below gets in the way, really.
Okay.
So it's right on the edge. But if you look at auditory versus visual, auditory is above average by a standard deviation. It's very good, but visual is very soft.
Okay.
And then if you look at the 3 scores below that, they're called vigilance, focus, and speed. Speed is how fast you are. You're very, very fast. You're the fastest the test can measure for your auditory information. 160 is its ceiling, 4 standard deviations above average. On the bell curve, you're off the bell curve. You're so fast.
How does age affect the differences?
This is depends on what we're talking about. For speed, by the time people are 30, they're a little bit slower than they were at age 15.
Okay. How would they compare with 15-year-olds?
I'm sorry?
How would they compare with 15-year-olds?
You would not be as fast.
Okay. Do you know how much?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Because it's not relevant, you know, really, right? Because it's about like how much myelin is in your brain. It's speed is one of the few things that changes. What we're seeing is there are some other things that matter, though. And that's these other 2, vigilance and focus.
Okay.
Vigilance is catching the new information when it changes gears.
Okay.
You're typical for auditory. You have a really hard time catching the 1 on the screen when it's visual.
Okay.
Very hard. You missed it most of the time when it changed into the 1. And then focus, the purple bar, is when it starts repeating again and again.
Okay.
It's how well you can stay engaged when things are repeating and not that changeable. It's also kind of soft. 2 standard deviations off the average there, about 3 there. So some softness, you know, especially visually. Because auditorily, you're so fast and you're so alert, you're catching stuff you're about to miss. So you're making up for the soft focus, really making up for it strongly. But it's a bit of an inefficient way to be. On this side, the visual side, you're being very, very, very quick, still 2 full standard deviations above average. But your alertness to change, called vigilance, and your sustained attention, called, or your background attention, called focus, They're softer, and so the speed can't make up for it. So that's why it's like this.
Is this also indicative of ADHD?
Yes, it is down here.
Low vigilance and focus. Oh, yeah.
Well, there's different. This whole thing can be ADHD depending, but this is a population check on inattention,
Okay.
impulsivity. So
Oh.
ADD features and ADHD features. You show both. It's
Oh,
not a it's not a diagnosis. It's just performance.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You can perform this way with a brain injury or fatigue or anxiety as well. You know, doesn't mean it's ADHD per se.
Okay.
It probably is with that much theta, by the way. But you know, it could also be anxiety or a mix. You know, labels aren't ever as nuanced as people, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So on this side, the visual side, it's hard to be alert, hard to catch the new information, and then you also get bored and drift.
Okay.
So a little more difficulty there. This side's average. The auditory is above average, and visual is slightly below average, but
Okay.
not really a big deal. But here the issue is called prudence, and that's visual. So prudence is being careful and adjusting.
Okay.
So if you squirrel, do you squirrel twice in a row, or do you like adjust the second time you make a mistake? So you click on the 2, pops the screen, oh, you did it again. Like you have a hard time steering and, you know, adjusting sometimes, it looks like.
Okay.
Auditorily, you're fine. You have good prudence. You make a mistake, you notice it. You have great stamina. You just kind of plow through the auditory test without getting more reactive to the spoken too. And even your visual stamina is very good. You don't get more reactive to the flash too. You're good at like pumping the brakes. It's good. But your prudence, your correcting and adjusting as you go is kind of soft right there. And then consistency, here and there, you're not perfectly consistent for auditory. Again, you drift a little bit. We see it there too, same pattern. So again, these are performance opportunities, and while some things are high, this is a high score overall, but it's not very efficient. Same thing over here, not very efficient. Like you could do this when you're refreshed, but you can't do this if you're stressed or tired or hungry or angry. You know, it'll be hard to perform because you're relying on some things to make up for other things. So while you've got great performance when everything's going perfectly well, the visual's having a harder time overall, and even the auditory, which is high, is a bit brittle. You know, like it'll fail later in the day probably.
Mm-hmm.
Now the bar graphs are the 1 second event. Identify, respond, prepare, do it again. It's very boring as you experience.
Mm-hmm.
But we also have sustained attention, which is the trends across time. Are you correcting and adjusting? Are you noticing? Are you speeding up or slowing down? That's called sustained. Excellent for auditory. 2 full standard deviations or more, above average, really good. Monitoring, adjusting. That tracks with good prudence, great stamina, great speed, you know, really nice auditory performance. I love it. But your visual, really hard time keeping it moving consistently. And that tracks with the vigilance being off as well. Kept like going offline. And the prudence, not able to correct the errors as easily. So really visual, particularly for you, sir. It's interesting. We'll see that probably in the brain and go after it, of course, from neurofeedback. But so far, again, high scores overall, a few particular bottlenecks, specifically in visual. You see it across the board. You do look like your performance is ADHD-like, but usually with ADHD, people have low vigilance and low prudence as well. Usually it's the 3, it's vigilance, focus, and prudence. You have fine vigilance, you have fine prudence on this side, but lousy prudence there, and lousy vigilance and focus. So it's like halfway to ADHD in some of the markers. Other ones look typical or even better than average.
Mm-hmm.
And it's enough of the bottlenecks to cause these things to trip positive.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean that it's exactly the same meaning for you in your brain as it is for somebody else called ADHD.
What does prudence mean?
Carefulness and adjusting as you go.
Okay.
What happens after you make a mistake? Do you make another mistake?
Oh, wow. How do they measure that?
By what happens after you make a mistake, the
Okay.
next trial.
Okay.
So if you click on a flashed 2 visual, you click on a 2 by mistake, well, you made a mistake. Are you going to then correct your errors or not? What happens next? If the next thing that shows up is another visual 2 and you click on it again, that's not good prudence. Or an auditory 2 shows up
basically,
and you click on it again, that's not good prudence, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it's the correcting and adjusting. So it goes along with impulsivity as well, because everything pulls your attention. You know, it's hard to adjust. And then this shows you have a lot of hyperactivity. This is about clicking on the 2.
How do they detect fine motor hyperactivity?
This is about clicking on the 2. You're in the extreme range. You clicked 20 times on the 2, and there's only 222. So almost 10% of the time you made an error. And then this fine motor score down here is about what's happening between the trials. So we're watching for fidgets and movement, which isn't scored, but I can tell you we're holding really still. Most adults are performing about 100 to 150 fidgets across the 400 trials. And you only did 46, which means you're holding very, very still, trying not to be impulsive, and you still were impulsive in the extreme range. So it's a brittleness. You're trying to control, but failing to control.
Wow.
And then we have comprehension, which was fine at the beginning, but by the end of the test, you were like, yep, come on. You tried to click through it a lot. You got really impulsive at the end of the test. It's not comprehension for an adult. It's just getting clicky during the instruction blocks or the cool down block.
Okay.
Probably a cool down for you here because you were kind of done. So again, really interesting. High scores and low scores mixed together, which is unusual. And most of it shows up on auditory, and you're mostly making up for it. But it's getting in the way, and we'll help you sort that out.
Okay.
Any questions before we jump into the brain maps?
Wow. Okay. Do those vary a lot by person?
Well, you're seeing how much it varies. You're seeing how much it varies per person, because the average person, if you could average a bunch of people together, it's all 100 points everywhere.
Yeah, it probably varies a lot.
It's 100 points for the average person, and each person has individual challenges. Yes. Once people are performing pretty well, what you see is flat bars, little 3 sets, 3 bars that are even across the tips, all 4 sets. So it's the inefficiency I'm concerned about, not any big or low scores. You want to see like 3 bars there, and 3 bars there, and 3 bars there, and 3 bars there, not like something's pushed up and something's dragged down.
Okay.
You'll probably come up above average, but right now you're using lots of effort to do it. You should be able to perform this well with no effort. And if you effortful, like this good stamina and speed, is you being effortful. If you can be this effortful, you should be able to drag your scores way up above average, not just barely to average. So I can tell there's a lot of resources being pushed up, and there's something getting in the way. So now we're going to look for those things here. All right, this is your brain. This is you compared to the average person your age. There's the bell curve right there. That's the scale. And here's the threshold, essentially. So you want to look for things that are 1.5 above or below average. 1 second. Just 47 and high beta 22. All right. So upper right-hand corner here is you, right? ALC. This is your new rapper name. We're calling you DJ ALC. And then eyes closed stands, EC stands for eyes closed. Remember you came into eyes closed recording, eyes open recording? So you had 2 different sets of recordings. Each set of recording will have different analyses. Upper left-hand corner shows us which page we're on. Laplacian means we're looking at every spot in the head with some precision, some spatial precision, zooming in. We lose the broad patterns. So on page 2, I flip it over to linked ears. See how theta is now covering the whole head? Focally, where it's coming from on page 1, a little on the edges, a little in the front, the absolute power. When you pull back, you can't tell. It's kind of swamping the whole head. There might be a little bit in the left,
Pull back?
Meaning linked ears does spatially broad patterns, shows us the broad patterns. And Laplacian shows us the small patterns, it zooms in. So Laplacian emphasizes data from every location, but can't show us patterns across the whole head. We look with precision at each location. Page 2, linked ears, shows us the broad patterns, but it can't show us the small patterns at the same time. But linked ears also shows us this. These are new for the second page. Coherence means connectivity. So red means you're more connected in the brainwave. So this is a brainwave called theta. And you have a lot of connectivity. It's stuck together in the front of the head compared to the average person. Here's the scaling on that. 2.5 standard deviations or z-scores. Over-connected, stuck together, theta. So I'm going to make some guesses about what this stuff means. It doesn't mean the same thing for everyone. I'm not saying what's right or wrong for you, Alex. I'm saying here's what's unusual. Now, the next part of the exercise is to talk about what some of these things can mean. And if you're like, oh, yeah, that sounds like me, well, then you know where it is and you can work on it. But if
Okay.
you're like, well, I don't know if that's true, well, then it's not true. This is not a diagnosis. It's just me helping you understand what could be possible, essentially.
Okay.
So looking here at the first page, I see a little bit of stuff next to the ears, right here, behind the ears especially.
Okay.
And this is usually auditory cortex or even sensory cortex on the right. So this looks like it's a little more active on both sides here behind the ears than is typical in theta brainwaves. My guess is that means it's hard to, here's a hypothesis. This might not be true, but tell me what you think. My guess is that it's hard to filter incoming auditory information. Like stuff distracts you, or you can't be in a room full of people speaking to other people because talking to one person is hard with all the other background information. Is that true?
I behave reasonably well in parties.
You don't?
Yeah, in parties, I can go from conversation.
You're fine? Okay. So that doesn't track then. That's good. Thank you for pointing that out. Another possibility from things back here is some vestibular things, some balance difficulty. Anything there?
No.
Okay. Third thing is likely some sensory integration, where you have a hard time ignoring things in the environment, like the sound of a light overhead or texture of cloth or someone chewing, 10 feet away. Stuff just gets in, you can't filter it. Does that happen?
But it's more like, it's not necessarily auditory that's the issue, it's more other things. But like a clock would annoy the hell out of me.
Gotcha. That makes sense then. So there's a target, that's a valid target for you probably, little sensory targets. You can train the theta down and you'll have a better gain knob. You can decide to ignore things. You won't have to. It won't dampen you, but it will give you more control over if you're attending that way or not.
Okay.
Now with the eyes closed, the beta waves are a little bit blue, which means they're lower than average.
Okay.
It's okay if they're lower than average with the eyes closed. When the eyes are open, you want them to come up.
Okay.
And the opposite's true. The deltas and thetas are slow brain waves.
Okay.
The eyes are open, those should go away.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, they're interesting, but not especially telling. I'm going to go to the second page, which is the broader spatial page called linked ears. And if you look here, there's a little beta in the back middle of the head and a little bit in the front middle of the head, a couple little features there. Now the eyes are closed and most people relax the brain. Some of the specific regions relax from beta waves when the eyes are closed. And you have a couple little regions in the front middle and the back middle that aren't letting go all the way, like most people. Now this is not that unusual. It's only one standard deviation. So about a third of people in the world will have this pattern, right? Because it's only out here in the bell curve. Mm. But here's some guesses. These are two different circuits that are related to each other. The front midline called the anterior cingulate cortex, and the back midline called the posterior cingulate cortex. They do some similar things. The anterior cingulate's job is to switch your attention by deciding what's important to think about. And the posterior cingulate evaluates the environment around you and helps you orient your attention to what you need to look at or decide to focus on. So if you're driving a car and you're looking at the floor or looking at your phone, not that you would do this, but if you did, the posterior cingulate would say, watch the road, and you would check back in. Or someone said, hey, Alex, heads up, and you looked up and caught the baseball or something. That's the posterior cingulate doing its job. The anterior cingulate is more internal and it's about what you're thinking about or focusing on. And when the anterior cingulate gets a bit hot or a bit stuck, this might be true for you, I don't know. Once it gets a bit hot, people will perseverate. They get stuck on things in their head. Okay. So songs can play, you might have a touch of OCD or nail biting or something. Is that true for you? Some sort
rumination, I ruminate a lot.
So the more visceral worry is probably from the back, it's the posterior, and the stuckness is from the front. So I call this perseveration and rumination. It looks like you have some aspects of both, and the rumination appears to be a little bit worse, the more visceral worry and chewing at things.
Rumination is posterior.
I'm sorry?
Rumination is posterior.
Generally, yes. The posterior cingulate is the rumination, and the anterior cingulate is perseveration. But they're connected, and they're both part of what is called the default mode network, a sort of part of the brain that lights up. We're thinking about ourselves and how we work internally. Yeah. It's subjective. These guys are lit up a little bit. So you're kind of chewing through some resources going, ooh, what to think about? what to stress about, you know, a little bit, it looks like. And this trains down really easily, you know, 20 sessions of this, exercising this, and you can decide to relax it whenever you want generally, and it becomes more under your control. So you can, if you want to ruminate or you have to think intensely, you can, but you aren't forced to anymore after you exercise this down generally.
Okay.
The theta is a little high, as you can see here, but again, eyes open is when I care more about this. I will say that with the connectivity, here's three more things I want to talk about. First of all, the connectivity is very high in theta in the front middle. That's the anterior cingulate again. That again suggests that we're talking about that perseverative feature. It's definitely visible in the data right there, how it operates for you. It's, you know, there it is. But the alpha waves have a low lag, a low phase lag, which means they're tightly tied together front to back. And usually that means you aren't getting good deep sleep and you're kind of burned out. Not getting good slow wave or dream less sleep at night. Not enough deep sleep, essentially.
Yeah, I have sleep apnea.
Well, that makes some sense. That's also with the coherence. Increased connectivity and decreased timing lag or phase lag, and delta also usually means, is some brain fog. So this is a sign the sleep is off. This is the consequence of it. The delta brainwaves, sleeping deep brainwaves, are kind of high and kind of stuck together because you aren't well rested. So this is the sign of being like hollow and not well rested. And this is a sign of being foggy. And it looks like you cranked your brain up a little bit and you're stressing and like selecting things with your mind in the front middle to kind of cut through the fog a little bit. And that leaves you very worried, you know, because you're caught in an activated mode for a long time. And the last thing to guess from this page is you have some theta that's especially high and some alpha that's a little bit high on the left front of the head. And sometimes when the left front gets higher in the slow brain waves like this, people can have difficulty with mood or motivation. They're not resilient or buoyant or enough. Is that true for you? Any issues with motivation or mood? Yeah? All right, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm glad we're seeing some of it because it's pretty straightforward to work on. But I would say this is the most important thing is these anterior cingulate, posterior cingulate, those default mode networks. Those are the biggest feature in some ways because you're seeing it there as well and there as well. So now I'm going to switch to a page which doesn't have any pictures. It's all numbers, as you see.
Okay.
And this is the average of the average frequency. It's how fast your brain waves are.
Okay.
Alpha is how fast you think. Your alpha is running fast and slow. So that tells me three things. One, you're built fast, very fast. People with this fast brain, up to 2/3 or a full standard deviation, probably faster than average. Generally are highly intelligent and prone to anxiety. So good job. You have plenty of resources with which to catastrophize and stress. Your brain's that good. But the fact that it's running slow suggests you aren't feeling very fast these days. You're feeling like you're dragging. And you may even be having some difficulty with your speed of processing when you're tired. And that would show up with things like difficulty with word finding. Hard to pull words out of your mind when you're tired.
Yeah, I'm tired a lot.
Is it hard to like verbally produce quick words or remember names or objects, delayed recall for things verbally or not?
Sometimes delayed recall. I'm better in writing than in person.
Cool. Makes some sense. The verbal stuff, it tends to be more time bound and writing does not. So that makes some sense. Delta, metabolic, sleeping brain waves, deep resting brain waves, keep your heart and lungs moving brain waves, doing some learning and storage of information brain waves. You don't think in delta, you live in it. Your delta is pushed way up. So up, it's pushing into your theta. Your theta is not actually fast, but your delta and your alpha are collapsing the numbers in theta. So delta is pushed up into theta, and the alpha is dropping down and slowing that frequency down essentially. So it's confusing the database. That's why it's the whole column's red basically. So delta is not being made enough at night when you're deeply asleep. So your brain's making it all day long. Little brownouts and micro sleeping happening because you aren't getting enough sleep at night probably. Beta waves are thinking frequencies. Our words, our mental thoughts exist in beta 1 and beta 2. It's about 10 times per second, about 15, 20 times per second. So those are a little sluggish. The highest frequency, which is taking information in, is also a little sluggish. Here and there, some things are cranked up, especially on the right-hand side of the head. They're cranked up in the middle a little bit here and there. So here's a metaphor for you, Alex. You're like some really nice sports car, really powerful, but you've left the driveway with the emergency brake on. and that's making you feel like you can't get your power engaged.
That's exactly what I did earlier this week.
To make up for it,
Yeah.
you're standing on the gas pedal and pushing.
Wait, so beta is minus. That's below average.
Yeah, it's
alpha is also below minus.
Yeah, the alpha is the speed of processing, but the beta is actually the processing itself.
Okay.
So some places it's above average, other places it's below average. The mix of feeling pushed and feeling depleted.
Wait, do you see alpha is high in some ways?
Yes, your alpha is set at a fast variant. You're built fast, but it's dragging down.
But it shows a combo of negatives and positives.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, it's a combination because you're built fast. By default, you're a fast brain, intelligent.
How can you tell the fast brain?
Because people because I can tell you're being dragged down. The negative numbers are a function of the delta. The
highest positive number is only 0.6.
Yes, but that's fast for a brain. 0.6 is fast. And 0.6 is fighting through a lot of negative numbers.
But that's only like 0.6 standard deviations above average.
Yes, but anything above 0.5 is interesting.
Interesting?
Yes.
What about high IQ people?
0.5 and up. And a spread that's wide is interesting, suggesting that this number is not your actual speed.
Mm-hmm.
Widespread suggests the speed we're seeing is actually you when inhibited. It should be faster and is broadly faster, except you're not able to bring the speeds up enough.
Oh, wow.
And the places that are slow is a function of your apnea, probably, or lack of deep sleep. Mm-hmm. So you're basically the sports car running with the emergency brake on. The emergency brake is the deep sleep. The drag is the places where you're only running average or a little above average or below average. But that's not normal for you. You're not zero. You aren't zero. You're probably more like 0.5 or 0.7 or 0.8. Once you release these negatives, it'll come together. I want the number across the whole column to be within 0.5. And you're like 2.
Wow.
You know, there's 1.5 range standard deviation spread out, you know, and it's dragging down. The whole range is dragging down.
Does depression also cause this?
It can, but it's chicken and egg. Anxiety can too. It's chicken and egg though. The sleep issue is a big deal. The slow processing is true. Both can show up from anxiety or from depression. Both can cause anxiety or depression. I can't tell you, but I can work on it with you. So again, the diagnosis is less important than if we're finding resources that seem relevant.
Okay.
And you being the sports car that's actually got a lot of mental resources, but you're not able to use them.
Okay.
You're pushing, and burning out and feeling fried, like you're a sports car that gets where you're going out of gas and overheated, you know, because you have to push so hard. The apnea stuff and the delta can make your brain look very foggy. Mm-hmm. So the next page, I'm going to look at a population of people with concussions 4 months after concussions, because the only symptom they have is brain fog. That's it. So it has the word injury on it, but we don't measure injuries. This is not a measurement of injuries for you.
Okay.
This is just measuring people with injuries and using them as a pure case of brain fog, because people will get every time pushed up into this category with apnea, a restless leg, or mold or Lyme. Or
traumatic brain injury probably index 95%.
Yes, but you didn't hear what I said.
Okay.
This does not measure injuries. I'm not looking at an injury. Okay. I'm using a concussion population as a pure case of one symptom, brain fog. It's all we're measuring. And every single time, apnea creates the signature. It's apnea making you look like this, not an injury.
Okay.
Every single time when people have apnea, they look brain foggy. But you can get pushed up into this population with apnea, mold, Lyme, chemotherapy, chronic anxiety, some mild wear and tear, or just having a weird brain. So it's not a measurement of injuries. It is a measurement of, it's a guess about fog. And you look foggy because you're up here. So 95% you're foggy is saying, and the severity is very high, 6 out of 10. So I'm going to guess you have no stamina late in the day. It's hard to be focused and engaged, and you burn out. You might be irritated too.
Yeah.
Now here we open your eyes, see it says EO, and all of the red mostly is gone. It's really quite nice actually. Now we see some blue, which is fatigue, just tiredness.
Is beta the highest frequency of them all?
Yeah, this one here.
It's like
slow,
active, doing things actively.
I'm sorry?
Say beta is basically doing things actively.
I couldn't quite hear you. Beta is
actively doing things.
Yes, beta is an engaged gear and different little regions. Like this little area is a little hot in beta, so
Okay.
it's, anterior cingulate. That one is doing more right now, doing more work.
More anterior cingulate brainwaves. That's perseveration.
Perseveration, exactly right. Or the whole stripe is happening here, anterior cingulate and posterior cingulate. So yes, perseveration, some rumination mix there. You see little hints of it, And there's some sensory stuff maybe there, little hints of it, nothing dramatic. Most people have, big red blobs. It's all right. Where it really shows up for you is if I go to linked ears. You see I pulled back, linked ears, the broad patterns. Now we see some alpha, and eyes open alpha can mean fatigue, tiredness, or inattention, spaciness.
Okay.
Lack of focus, which we know is kind of true for you.
Mm-hmm.
So this can mean some ADD. Might be. It's not classic ADHD, which is almost always lots and lots of theta.
Okay.
But you see in the back of the head, visual is having issues in theta and on the auditory as well. So this is why the attention test, has visual stuff that's worse. It's because the place where you can't wake the brain up is the back of the head. It's a visual system.
Wow, I can't wake my brain up in the back of my head. That's still fascinating because I'm like a visual learner.
Yeah. Well, you can't wake up the brakes, only the gas pedals.
Okay.
So you can't stop it from switching gears and noticing all this stuff. It's hard to point it in one direction. You also see down here the same kind of perseverative connect, front midline stuff again, the anterior cingulate. Same thing. And then at the end, these are ratios of frequencies.
Okay.
There's 3 rows. The top row has delta in the numerator. Things in this row predict sleep issues, generally. So this is your apnea, probably. Keeping the back of your brain from getting rest. Middle of the brain. Middle row is executive function, attention, ADHD. Mm-hmm. When people have ADHD, these heads here are bright red. You don't have classic ADHD.
Wow.
When people have ADD, inattention, 80% of the time, this head is red. And sometimes this head here. So something's happening for you, producing some inattention right there. But you know what? It's not everywhere. It's just kind of right in this left side. And that's a particular circuit in the left side. Mm-hmm. So this particular one requires, it maintains focus when things drop in intensity. Meaning you're fine if things are dynamic and changing, playing a video game or a fight. But if things drop in intensity, you drift and go on autopilot, and it's a soft autopilot. Like if you read a book, 10 minutes in, you discover that your mind's been off doing something else. Your eyes are mechanically scanning the book, but not actually taking the information in.
Yeah, I have sleep all the time.
And this is like exacerbated by sleep, but it's not a true ADHD phenomena. So you have a hint of attention difficulty in a big issue, a big obvious thing with sleep and anxiety. And then you have some scores that are amazing on your attention and some things that are iffy. But the things that are iffy, like focus and prudence, can be explained by your brain kind of being extra sleepy.
Okay.
So I think you have a little ADHD, like a 2 out of 10, enough to get the benefits maybe. Mm-hmm. But then you're so unrested and so cranked up to compensate that you're anxious, you're wired and tired, and you're a bit brittle. So if you're on the highway, metaphorically, and you have the brakes all the way engaged and your foot on the gas pedal all the way to push through that, and somebody cuts you off, you twitch the wheel, and you're 3 lanes over all at once. And from the outside, that looked like you were impulsive, but it's really reactive. Impulsivity happens before your beta waves act. It's a disinhibition, but you have a little bit of you pushed yourself up, so it's more a brittleness. And we see that here as well. You have very good vigilance. You have very good prudence there. That doesn't happen with ADHD ever, that you have good vigilance and good prudence. Now, visually it's lousy, but nobody has ADHD only in visual and not in auditory. That doesn't make sense. So there's something very interesting and unique to you, but we see it here. And it gives us targets. And we'll exercise this down and break this up and bring up this stuff. And you'll be sleeping like a rock, hopefully. And this theta will then go away a little bit, and your mood will come up, your motivation will come up, you'll unclench the anxiety stuff, ideally. Now, tell me more about your apnea. Is it central apnea, or is it peripheral, or is it both? Do you know?
It's peripheral. I just got, one day after I did this, I got my first round of apnea surgery with Eric Kalerian.
Okay, so they're doing some ablation of the
Reduction.
passages? Okay. So that'll change some things. You should map your brain periodically as you feel different, because that'll change how you're sleeping, which is a big part of what's going on here. I think anxiety is a stuck phenomena because of the deep unrest in some way. You've had to push and push and push for resources, and now they're stuck a little bit. And neurofeedback can change them. Let me show you some other people for just a second. I have to run in a few minutes, but let me show you something for a second.
Okay.
So these are 4 other people.
Oh, holy shit.
They're not you, obviously, but they're also, interesting thing is, some of the same patterns. You know, the cingulates we mentioned? This guy has classic OCD. That's the front midline. He has real classic OCD. You had a little hint of that, but not like this.
Okay.
This is classic ADHD.
Okay.
This is like a mood thing with an alpha stripe that has some focus issues. You have some of this as well.
But it's not.
You don't have the classic depression features. You don't have the classic ADHD features.
I don't have classic depression or ADHD.
You look burnt out. You're probably depressed, but I don't see like it as a cause of what's going on. I see it as a result. You look inattentive, you look burnt out, you look anxious, you have some sleep issues. Making some mild ADHD and some mild mood stuff get a lot worse.
Okay.
Here's hypervigilance, eyes are closed, the brain's like scanning, can't let go. Here's a guy who's drinking for 25 years in the absence of alcohol. This is him 45 days sober. He couldn't stop moving and talking, couldn't fall asleep without a drink ever. He needed major medication to fall asleep because 25 years of alcohol dependence. In the absence of alcohol, his brain was lit up and buzzy. Couldn't make sleep waves. So you have some of the same delta, lack of delta that he has, that he had. I'll find it right there. Not dramatic for you at all, right? Compared to this guy. There's a little bit right there, you know. And that's just a sign you can't make good deep sleep. But for him, it was a function of drinking, and he just didn't sleep very well for decades and couldn't sleep. Well, these are all the same people on the right-hand side after doing 10 weeks of neurofeedback. You know, and they had dramatic subjective experiences change across this kind of time.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, I don't know what you'll experience, but that's not really, it's not about prescriptive like medicine. It's more like personal training.
Yeah.
Where we kind of go look at this and go, ooh, I hope this stuff is relevant. Let's ask Alex some questions and see if he can, you know, see if this stuff matters to him. If it does, great. Now we know what to go after. And we would just expect to get effects after maybe 5 or 6 sessions of neurofeedback. And then you start getting more effects as we, you know, push harder. But the biggest thing appears to be a sleep issue with a lot of compensatory anxiety as the primary thing that I see, honestly. I never give like a diagnosis, like here's what's going on. But for you, my friend, you don't look classically ADHD. You don't look classically depressed. You don't appear to have a head injury. You just look like you got burnt out and your brain's gotten stuck this way. It's kind of out of shape, and it's stress and energy management now, you know? So this is stuff I would expect to change reasonably quickly. Like again, 5, 6 sessions, like, wait a minute, I feel a little different. Another few sessions, start describing what that is. You know, these little cingulates, as you exercise, them become more flexible. And you can like put down stuff that bothers you more easily, or focus a little more sustained way on things you do want to think about. So give you a little more control over these internal resources. But for you, I kind of expect your sleep to change. And plus with the ablation surgery, the neurofeedback tends to not help obstructive apnea, obviously, because it's the tissue involved. But central apnea is the brain forgetting to keep the throat open, as you know. And neurofeedback can help that.
Okay.
And often obstructive apnea can kind of lead to an exacerbation of central apnea. Like the brain learns to have apnea because it's obstructed frequently. So if you're taking care of the obstructive stuff, we may be able to get some quicker relief because we're helping the brain remember how to like not just put up with apnea, so to speak, you know? But we'll see, I mean, we see some of the fact that your delta is a little bit slow, or rather low, the blue and delta. That's what we'll be looking for, that plus the speeds. Delta relaxing the speed, and other things like that. So, All right, my friend, I have to run in a moment. Any questions for me at this point?
Will all be emailed to me?
Yeah, the recording we have will be available later on tonight, and then we can email you everything tomorrow if you want. So.
Okay, cool. And also neurofeedback. How much does like 5 neurofeedback sessions cost?
We don't generally get effects in about 5 more than noticing it. So we tend to do 1 month as a minimum, and that's $1,250. Or a 4-month program is $4,000 even if you want to do a multi-month program.
Okay.
But you can always just do a single month. It'll wear off probably, but when you resume, it picks right back up. You don't have to do it uninterrupted to have the results.
Oh, so neurofeedback is like once a week or something?
3 times.
3 times a week.
So a single month, 3 times a week is 13 sessions. That's enough to get you moving and probably feel it pretty well, but not enough to create a permanent change.
Wow, 13 sessions, 3 times.
Yeah, it'll take about 40 or 50 total probably to get you to a nice arc of change. That's usually what we do.
40 to 50 different sessions.
Yeah, like 3 to 4 months usually. Yeah.
Wow, that's really intense.
Well, it's working out. Half an hour at a time though. It's not the whole thing. It's not the cap and the attention test. It's just the half an hour attention a game. That's it. 3 times a week. And we repeat the brain mapping 20 sessions in, and that helps you understand how things are changing and helps us understand. And then you are available, encouraged, allowed to do brain mapping whenever you like. Brain maps change very slowly, but there's no charge to you in the future to do another brain map. So you're welcome to use it as an investigation tool over time. That's a piece that's paid for, never charged again, which is really to help you have agency, have self-control. Then we charge you for the training, either monthly or multi-month programs. But you can take a break. It's like a gym membership. You're too busy a week, take a break, save the sessions, and then come back next week and resume. It'll pick right back up. So
is neurofeedback like are my brain oscillations better during neurofeedback?
I'm sorry?
And is a cap put in my head from neurofeedback?
No, just the ear clips and 1 or 2 wires.
Oh, ear clips. So is anything measured?
Yes, ear clips and 1 or 2 wires.
Okay.
Did you do a demo session after your brain map or not?
I kind of did a demo session, but
It's one of those.
What?
It's those 3 times a week. 2 ear clips.
Okay.
1 or 2 wires on top of your head.
Okay. How does it measure if I'm paying attention or actually doing things?
It measures your theta brain waves moment to moment. They change by themselves.
Okay.
Whenever they change in the right direction, whenever theta drops, the game runs better.
Okay.
Teaches your brain how to do that, basically.
Okay.
Your brain likes more information. So tomorrow, it'll do more of that.
Okay.
All right, so I have to run, but this has been recorded, of course. Digest it. Come on back with questions if you have them. And I would expect after about 3 or 4 sessions of training, you'll start to feel a little change in your sleep and your clarity. And that'll be kind of interesting. And it shouldn't be dramatic, but it should be kind of noticeable, like a cup of coffee or something, Mm-hmm. All right, Alex. Well, take care of that apnea stuff. And if you get big changes from the surgery, map again in a few weeks or a month or 2. So you can see how it looks after you feel different. Okay? All right. Well, I'll talk to you soon. Let me know how we can support you.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Sure. See ya.